going to start recording. We are recording now, so don't say anything bad. Okay, so I'm sharing with you uh, this concept of team structure, looking at ratio of usage of the
Oh,
SNAP data.
yep.
And I guess the lesson here is when you have some data, sometimes it's just easy to throw a linear regression at multiple variables just to see overall patterns. And what we have here is looking at team ratios, tight ends versus wide receivers. And you can see a +4 versus the -4 is kind of the boundaries there. It's probably more like about 35 or something, the top and bottom.
Hmm.
And so a plus means there's tends to be more usage of the tight end in the team relative to the wide receiver. The opposite is more extreme wide receiver usage and less tight end usage. So that's the extremes there, right? So teams are really using wide receivers and not much tight ends, or they're using tight ends a lot more than their wide receivers relative to the situation, right? So relative. So these over here where I'm doing, that would be the higher tight end usage. This would be the lower tight end usage. So this would be the higher wide receivers, and this would be a little bit lower compared to tight ends. So just team structure. And when you do this, I measured in green passing attempts, rushing attempts, and score per game. So the uh, look at the crisscross here. So when you're using a lot more tight ends and less wide receivers relative, you're passing less, actually. You see how it's going down.
Interesting.
But look at the rushing, exact opposite. So those teams are rushing more and passing less when their tight ends are in play. So it's almost a tell. Does that make sense? In other words, they're kind of
Yeah,
telling,
yeah.
like, my wide receiver crew is not doing it again as a group, not wide receiver ones. There could,
Right.
there's all could be a unicorn there, but it's saying there's something going. And notice the scoring is going a little bit up. In other words, rushing this year, passing less, using the tight ends more, you're tending to, those teams are scoring more than teams that are not using their wide receivers, not rushing a lot, and passing a lot. In other words, passing too much is almost like they're trying to score something and they're not, they're scoring the least and they're rushing the least.
So it's almost like the what you're catching here are the teams that are getting blown out and having to throw
It
because they're
could be
playing
part
from
of it.
behind.
Could be,
Yeah.
or it could say something about the the player, who's on the team, the strength of the units, the what they have in reserve. So, like I said, this concept of systems analysis and trying to understand things at a bigger level. No, like I said, nobody I know is thinking like this, Dennis, trying to break down a bigger picture. Because if this is year to year, in other words, you'd want to look each year.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if it's predictive, then, we have some thoughts about drafting and who, especially deeper in the crews of the wide receivers and the tight ends and whatnot. So I'm just trying to understand it at a bigger level here. And I just wanted to show you, the reader, the listeners, the viewers. And so this is going to play out. And if I tell Dennis, folks, that means he'll help me remember, because it's going to be a long off season. And but this is the kind of thinking. I know everybody's just worried about, what they're playing this week. I understand. I got 40 leagues. I'm there too, but I have more time getting ready to retire, so applying my data fun skills. And this is what came up the other day, because I introduced team structure a little bit, and I just trying to find another thing that points us and gives us an advantage in the draft off season. And just what does it say? So I would look at those teams, Dennis, and just visually look at the player names and just kind of get a sense of, okay, here's this group out over here, the minus group and the plus group, and what are we seeing? Just kind of just taking a look, not trying to jump to any conclusion, just kind of have a snapshot of what's going on and whatnot. So we'll follow this. I may not come back to this till off season. And you're saying, well, what about the other ratios? Pretty much here's RBs to WRs, pretty flat, I thought. Nothing, clearly not this, where you have, usually when you see crossing, that's really suspicious, something is happening. This is more where, nothing's happening. If everybody's kind of like this, and here is RB to tight end. Now we're starting to see a little bit towards the crossing back here, and a little bit of variance here in the rushing, but then RB versus tight end usage. So here would be heavy RB, lighter tight end. This would be heavier tight end, lighter RB over here. And we're starting to see a little bit of something happening. So it's just pointing me to look deeper and multi years, because you need more than 1 year to see how this looks. And this is the advantage of the landscape view, Dennis, that people get so in the weeds so quick and so player centric, that I think it's good to. And I would suspect, I think the coaches, they don't have this chart, Dennis. I bet they don't. It's just they know, hey, I've got this group of people, and they just know through their experience, I need to play these this way or that way. So I need to play a lot more tight ends or less tight ends, kind of thing. In other words, they know by game planning, and then it's probably, like Belichick, specific to the game, the masters here. But I think just overall big pictures, I bet you I wonder if they even look deep at the landscape of, this last 17 games, how did I really do overall? What was my big picture? I'm wondering if they get a little. I don't know. I don't know an NFL metrics person. I don't know if they start, because that's what I would do. I would start at the top and roll down, and then take at the bottom and roll up. That's how I would jump and do my metrics here. So there is something suspicious here. And notice tight ends are the key here, Dennis. I mean, we were flat here, but tight ends in the mix of the structure, measuring them, and right there. So we kind of think about tight ends, but I'm wondering, is that telling us something bigger than we've thought about before? Just seeing these potential trends. You see what I'm saying is, maybe looking preseason at what the tight end may be all about. And does that tip us a little bit to rushing, to passing? and kind of skew us a little bit in thinking, especially drafting deep into these, backfields and to these wide receiver rooms. So that's my feeling is I think the big pictures, tight ends usage is is depending on how it relates to the running backs and wide receivers. Right now, that's what I would really want to focus on. This is what this data would indicate is you need to really understand the tight end in relationship to the RB and WR in a team. How about that? And I've never
Yeah,
heard anybody really talk about it like that.
no, nor have I. Go back to the tight end one where it shows the crossing, and
Yep.
so I've got some questions
Okay.
here when I see a chart like this
Mm-hmm.
because it reminds me of the data that you look at when you see on Sundays, okay, and you see some analyst saying, "Oh, every time they've been over 30 carries a game,
Mm-hmm.
they're they've got a record of 22-1 over the last 4 seasons or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And the the big question, of course, the joking question is, well, why didn't you run 35 times then if it's causing you to win?
Yeah.
Versus what I think it is it's a reaction to how the team is going. In other words, if they would run 35 times a game every single game without regardless to game script and score, they wouldn't be 22-1 over the last 3 years. It'd be closer to 500 or maybe even below 500. But when I look at this data, so I see it one thing again, weather forecasters love clusters. Okay. And this looks like a natural tiering of data to me because you've got that area just to the right of the center axis where it gets really crowded. Like there's a lot of concentration of data in that 0 to plus about zero point 0.7 range. There's a huge clustering of data right there. And then you've got this other cluster of data on the opposite side, closer to about -5 to about -12. So you've got these natural clusters that happen, and then you got the clusters on the extreme of the really bad teams and the really good teams is how I read that data. It's just very interesting to see, and I would love to see this data done for like the last 5 seasons and see how it compares to
Yes.
2024. Are we seeing something here that will clue us in? Because if we do see this pattern repeating, and let's say we see this pattern repeating for certain teams and not for other teams, maybe we see this pattern very similar for the teams with really good tight ends, and we see more fluctuation year to year for teams that do not have good tight ends. Then when we look at the teams with the good tight ends, we know where their wide receivers and RBs are going to be. We've got a little more confidence of where they might be in this whole graph. And the other thing that I always look at is if I see more scoring, just like when we compare our squirrel games to our husky games, anytime I see more scoring, that makes me happy because it's opportunities for every player.
Yeah.
But so maybe what this tells us is if you have a really good tight end and he's getting used a lot, that might be worth almost like from the worst to the best. I mean, we're talking darn near 6 points. I mean, we're talking 5 point difference, maybe. That's a pretty big difference in the scheme of the NFL. That's almost a full touchdown difference. And if we got a full touchdown difference advantage from one team to another team, like best to worst. And there's a couple of data points. It's not just like one data point skewing things. There's a few data points up there that suggest this is where your best tight ends live. And as we know, the elite group of tight ends is usually only about 2 or 3 deep, period. And this data also confirms that it tells us, okay, you got 3 really good tight ends, you got 3 elite tight ends, and that's it. There's no trying to search for who's the fifth best tight end because he's back in the pack. And my consensus data really showed that this week when I looked at the data for tight ends using my consensus. There was a huge group that was hanging out starting at tight end 5. There was like a 2.5 tier difference between 4 and 5, and then another tier difference between 4 and the top 3. So your difference from 5th to 15th, for instance, was almost as great as it was it was actually identical from 1st to 4th. So it's interesting when you see a scattergram like this, and it confirms there's 2 really great tight ends, and then another who is rising, which was probably Kelsey due to a slow start. But this is very interesting. I love these scattergrams because in addition to seeing how the regression works, and when you see the data cross like that, you're right, it does tell you there's something there that is happening. Why are we seeing this relationship? But when you see that blue line for scoring
going up gently,
but a very
it's
a better slope than the other data. The other combinations, the other comparisons.
well, I mean, this one's completely flat.
That's flat. That's not telling you anything.
No.
But when you see a difference like this,
it's suspicious.
It's very suspicious, and it tells me that this is worth researching more in the off season to see if this holds from year to year. And this is the key, folks. Is everybody's like, well, how do you find time to be doing stuff that isn't necessarily going to benefit you this year? It's because the data's fresh. We're starting to see patterns in the data that gets you to do more research then and there while it's fresh.
I didn't want to wait.
No, it's fresh.
And it's like, Dennis, it's a hot potato. And that's why I got to tell you, because if I don't, I'll forget about it. And so this is why the podcast and our collaboration, that's what collaborations do, is it allows the other one to keep track of what's going on so they can come back. We circle back here in February, March, and because I'm gonna hit the, you're gonna be hitting the ground running. I'm gonna be going. We're gonna be full tilt next year. Be spending hours a week every day, and so I understand. I heard on the radio they were talking about how much money people make, and if you compare in fantasy and compare like how many hours you work for it. Yeah, it's pennies on the dollar, Dennis.
But this is
what I've got to. I'm a data person, and I got to solve these puzzles. That's what I like. I like to puzzle solve. I like to use the scientific method to approach questions, and this just is burning. This is why I would stay in the lab all night. We could do it. I've slept on lab benches, okay, and we had I had a experiment where I had to sample my cells every 2 hours. You can't go out and party and come back. You pretty much stuck in there, and you just gotta sitting around listening to radio. And this was during hair metal band in the 80s. And so, little Poison, little Van Halen and
Oh
things.
yeah.
Yeah. Listening to all that, Motley Crue, and you just go to sleep. And then about an hour, you'd wake up, go sample and do some things, go back. So yeah, that's what drove me to work 80 hours a week in the lab with no windows. And, that's just what I did for years. Uh, Dennis, years. I
Yep.
mean, it's like a monk in a monastery. It's like learning kung fu or something. You just sit there hours and hours practicing, doing it, thinking. So anyway, so this makes me happy doing this research, and I share it with Dennis so that I can help remember it. So it's selfish, but it's fun, and it's fun to have folks like you guys listening and watching to share it with. And and I know that drives Dennis as well. We share that passion of the discovery, I guess. We like to be the first one. We like to be mountain climbers and versus valley crossers, Dennis, and that's what we are. And I don't know if I related the difference. Have I told you that? Have I told our listeners?
I don't recall. No, I don't
Mountain.
think so.
Okay, so I tell my students, I said, you need to decide what you're going to do if you're going to be a researcher. Are you going to climb mountains, or are you going to be a valley crosser? And you really need to try to be both. And it's hard to be both. But a valley crosser means you're doing something, you don't know where the next mountain is. You find the next mountain, and then everybody jumps up and starts climbing it. I mean, that's what breakthroughs in science are. That's what's like being on the edge, right? The edge. So
Yep.
valley crossers find that edge, and then everybody jumps up and climbs the mountain. And so I like to find, so this is the valley crossing. And now, Dennis, off season, I'm going to spend climbing the mountain. I'll look year and year and year and putting it all together. But you got to find the valley first. You got to find that next mountain. You got to go across the valley. So there's valley crossing and mountain climbers. And what I see a lot of these days, it's hard, it's rare to see valley crossers, Dennis, that are pushing, at least I guess, on free. I'm assuming the models and things are, going to different, finding new mountains, but I don't know. They just give you a black box. Here's the rating. Where'd you get this? I don't know. I mean, it could be, rolling dice. I don't know what they're doing. So anyway, that's a valley crosser. And unfortunately, then it's just because you decide to cross the valley doesn't mean there is a mountain there. You can spend your lifetime. I mean, there's people in science that basically at the end of the career, they were like, you were right years ago. You spent all this time and nobody listened to you, and you finally were proven right. And that's what happened in some very famous people that broke paradigms, is they weren't really recognized after the fact that they were right. The father of genetics, he was Gregor Mendel, and he was a monk, Dennis, and he raised garden peas, and he meticulously took notes about when he would breed certain garden pea with characteristics, like if they have a type of pea pod that was one, curly versus wrinkled, or the peas were wrinkled or round, and he would mate them, and he would do it a lot and write down the results of the children of the parent plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was doing all that, and it went out, but nobody paid attention to it. Was discovered years later that he found the basic understanding of inheritance. the dominant versus recessive genes that you hear about. Gregor Mendel, a monk, actually, in the 1800s, he was playing with pea plants. And I don't know what makes you want to sit and breed pea plants and count the number of round seeds and the wrinkled seeds and the color of the flowers, pink and red and white, and make notes and sit there day in, day out, year after year, gathering that large amount of data. That was he must have been a really interesting individual, probably pretty boring at the the parties back in the 1800s. I don't know if they partied that much. I mean, you know, just just staying alive with all the bacteria and the leprosy and the plague and everything. I guess that was enough partying.
If you were alive, that
Yeah,
was
you were
worth
alive.
partying.
Well,
Yeah.
I did have
I'm
to
having,
chop something off today because
I'm having a.
that's why in Star Trek they called Dr. Bones, and it's short for Sawbones, because in the old days, Dennis,
Oh
you
yeah.
went to the doctor, you go lose something, a toe, an eye, an ear, something was coming off, and that's about all they could do for you. Back before antibiotics, well, we'll have to chop this off. So, I mean, my grandfather said, I ain't going to the doctor because people, only sick people and people end up dead at the doctors, because back before antibiotics, you went to the doctor because there wasn't nothing else to do for you and you were probably dead, you know? So he was in the hills, they knew better. So you better go drink you some Mountain Dew or something. You have just as much chance as letting the doctor start carving things off of you.
Yeah,
Anyway, enough
and see
fun.
this.
Enough fun.
Yeah, Mendel. If he ever had, if he hadn't been
Gregor Mendel. Yeah.
if he hadn't been a monk and he would have had descendants, they'd be like really good at fantasy football now because they'd be looking for those patterns as well.
Yeah,
So
but he sat around and played with his garden peas, and it took years after he was gone to figure out all his data. He's not the only one. Yeah.
no, well, there's a classic one in business that the guy who Goodyear Tire is named after. He came up with the process. Okay,
Accidentally, wasn't it?
accidentally, very
Yeah.
accidentally,
Yeah.
but he was searching for this answer of how to make this rubber better,
Yep.
and he ended up having to sell his formula
Yep.
because they threw him in debtor's prison,
Yep.
and he died penniless. And the Goodyear company went on to be this mega company. But sometimes the things that are discovered are not realized for some time well after that person is gone. And when it comes to the fantasy football world, what I see is not so much the valley crossers versus the mountain climbers. I just see people trying to avoid the mountains.
Well,
They
I mean, you got to go up there and figure it all out, Dennis. I just found this team structure, and it looked like something was there. Now we got to go do the real work.
yeah, and that's similar to how I discovered my weekly values and my
Yes.
MVP concepts were just because I didn't
Now we're
understand.
testing really deep
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
because I didn't understand why. I always wanted to know the answer to the question why.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I see nowadays is I don't see enough people wanting to find
Curiosity.
the answer. They don't have the curiosity. They just want to make noise and make
The curiosity
predictions.
comes first, and then if it's worth noise, right? Because not everything in science is worth noise.
Oh no, no.
No. In
And we
fact, a
have
lot of the times, Dennis, over the years, I've done things. It's like, yeah, I'll drop it because it's like, it's either not ready for me to get deeper, or something else is calling my attention. Yes, if I had interns, I would, that we would go down every damn road and we would plow every field, right? Until it's just, there's nothing to do now. We've done everything we can do. But I don't, I'm one person, you're one person. We can only do what we can do.
Well, the first thing that I discovered when I started looking at weekly solutions is I looked at how many times a player had a top 12 finish in a week. And that was the first data that I really chased, were these top 12 finishes, until I realized, I mean, just looking at the data from this year, there's been a spread from RB1 to RB12 on any given week. There can be a spread some weeks that is rather narrow. And then there are other weeks where the spread is incredible. And it's an incredible size spread. So the difference between tight end one and tight end, or RB1 and RB12, for instance, it's not a constant. So when I chased the data and it didn't do anything for me in making me better, I was like, okay, I don't understand this. But then when I looked at the values and the difference in the values, there are guys that luck into a tight end or to an RB12 finish. But if you grade them the same as an RB1 finish, and there's a difference of 40 points on that given week, then what good is that data? And it wasn't until that discovery was made about how variable RB1 is from week to week, and how variable the spread between RB1, RB6, RB12 is any given week. When you see that that's not even close to being a constant, when you see some weeks that that difference is as little as 10 points, and other weeks where it's a difference of 40 points, all of a sudden it's that aha moment of, I'm chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But people hear others in the industry use that, and they think it means something because this guy on Sirius said this player is better than that player because he had 4 more top 12 finishes last year than this other guy. And I looked at the data and tested the data and figured out that, yeah, okay, there's something there, but it's too variable to be worth counting. Because if you can get an RB12 finish with as little as 12 or 13 points some weeks, and other weeks it takes 20 or 22 to make that group, then why are you chasing something that is so variable? You need to chase fixed point values. And that's what my MVP, that's what my weekly values, all of those tools chase a fixed value. And it's possible some weeks, Professor, we could have 40 guys that finish above the median, what we know is the historic median. So what? That means other weeks there's going to be well below that number that finish, because over the course of the whole year or the course of 5 seasons looking at this, it will all work its way out. But if you're just looking at top 12 finishes, you're going to be very disappointed. But people don't do the research to figure that out. They hear somebody use something. Oh, this guy was number 1 in air yards. That must mean something because somebody that is an important player in the fantasy football world who's got his own radio show is talking about air yards. So I'm going to chase air yards. But if air yards end up showing you 6 losers for every 3 winners, what good is that? It's not doing what you need it to do. What you need is for a statistical tool to show you 9 winners versus 3 losers. Now all of a sudden I got a 9-3 advantage. Now it's data worth chasing. And that's what I think you're seeing in this data, where 2 of the comparisons were pretty flat. They didn't really say anything.
Oh.
The other is got lines crossing, and it's got a slope to the scoring. That tells me that if that relationship sticks together, and this is more than just a 2024 thing.
Oh yeah. Well,
then we've got some data.
Well, what I'll do is I'll look year to year, and we'll look at those graphs year to year. Then we'll look at the whole thing, and then we will apply analysis of variance and the post-ad hoc testing between the groups. I'll divide them into the 3 groups: the above whisker, the box, and below whiskers for each sector. And I'll compare, and we'll apply stats once we got a lot of data. So first I want to see, is there 3 or 4 years that are showing something? And the question, and if there, here's the thing, folks, this is what's interesting about, if 2024 is completely different than the way it's been before, that's interesting too.
Yes.
Because what's going on? Why this year? Right. Versus, every year's like this. Okay. I mean, I don't see, Dennis, I don't know that. And that that's what I'm saying. It's going to be fun. It's not like I'm in bed. I guess I'm saying I don't need it to be one answer or the other. Yes. I just need to figure out the answer. And either way, I've got something to consider, to think about further, and to test other kinds of possibilities. So that's what I look forward to.
And this year has been a very bizarre year for the tight end position.
Yes. And I looked at the scoring, and you can look at that. I did PPR scoring snap, and I think I showed it, but if I didn't, first 4 weeks were really unusual and low versus the next 4. I think I looked first 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Completely different. It was none, the other positions weren't like that. I think a couple of weeks ago we talked about that. But yeah, so something was happening, and I don't know if it's by chance. Was it just some of the top tight ends weren't quite in game shape yet? I don't know.
Yeah, it was very interesting because when you look at 10 or more points, how many guys scored 10 or more points at the tight end position? Week 1 was 5.
Yeah.
Week 2 is 8. Yeah. Week 3 was 7. Yeah. That's really low. Week 4 was finally 10, which is getting back a little closer to the median. Then all of a sudden, week 5 went up to 17, even though 4 teams were on bye.
There you go.
Then week 6 with 4 teams on bye went up to 13.
There you go.
Then 16. Then 18 week 8.
Yeah. So my method caught what your method caught. We both caught that pattern.
Yeah. And then it fell down to 10 last week.
Yeah. So in other words, you wonder, but I think that, so does that drive team structure when they start giving more snaps, and, coaches are kind of like, okay, let's go this way or go, that's what I'm trying to figure out, is the bigger picture, trying to understand. And it may be all back to, as you say, game script and things. And, there's more to it than that. I just don't, I'm just trying to nibble a little bit at a time to break this down.
Yeah. And what I'm going to be doing in the off season is I'm going to be charting performances with MVP data So in other
Well,
words, I'm going to be looking at players above a certain MVP. How did they do relative to the four different levels of defense they could be facing? So when you look at it that way, we can kind of see, and we might see some pattern recognition of, you know, are better players more immune, or does everybody drop a certain level? That's what I want to do more research on. And you've got to keep in mind that the depths are always changing. The defenses are always changing. Guys are missing games. And it's sometimes very tough when a team loses two or three starters for 1 week to see what that does to them. And we have, there's so many different complex levels to this game. You can't chase it all, but you could chase certain factors and see how they do affect things. But I've seen with my Chiefs, who I follow closely, obviously, as being a Chiefs fan, where they've missed two or three of their defensive guys and you never know it. And then you see another team lose just one good cornerback. Their best cornerback is out and they're 10 points worse that week as a defense. It's so different from team to team. Some teams have the depth to withstand injuries, some do not. We saw strength out of Buffalo early in the season. Then, as they started getting some injuries, we've seen that defense be more vulnerable. It's hard to pick that up with our DAP data. And it's hard to pick it up from week to week on who is missing. This game has so many different layers to it. Maybe one of the best pieces of news is we'll never figure it all out. So it'll keep us interested and keep searching for answers versus something that would be a lot easier to figure out. We'd get the answer and then we'd be bored.
yeah.
There's always things to chase. There's always things to follow. But I just don't think the majority of people out there producing fantasy football content and calling themselves experts. See, we never call ourselves experts. We, we,
Researchers.
call, we call ourselves researchers and data scientists.
Yes.
We're better than maybe 75, 80% of fantasy football players because of our knowledge base. But we're not, I won't consider myself an expert. Somebody else has to
Well, I
anoint you
did
with
a
that
thing
term.
on the expert problem. I did a
Yeah.
video on that. And until we have basically a PhD level education in fantasy football informatics, these people will know stats, they'll know pattern searching, they'll know probability, they'll know how to get the data, they'll understand heavy duty on how to analyze it, present it, deal with it, use the scientific method and push it forward. That'll be the journal, there'll be a society, you know, that's a scientific society. And
But
I don't know if we'll ever see that, but that's, I hope some college, university somewhere and it probably come out of the computer information science departments or the data science departments that because I mean, I think a lot of kids, I think you'd get a lot of people interested that are kind of data wonks and stats people if you put it in a formalized program to where you could actually get a PhD. And you would think the job market that there would be a lot with all the fantasy sports that are out there, different
oh
types.
yeah, and sports
If
gambling.
somebody, yeah, in the gambling side, you would think if you had a PhD in that, then, you published papers and defended, your new research. I would think that would get a lot of attention. and a lot of work and opportunities out there. And so, I mean, universities should look for that. They should look for new things. And I think that's something that's not going away, Dennis. I think it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger. And, I don't know if we'll get to see that. That would be really neat to
So,
see that
so
formed. Then you would have experts.
then two things on that though. Expert organizations can be corrupted.
Well, yeah.
I've seen that with the American Meteorological Society.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean everything that the MS does is bad,
No.
but I've seen that corrupted to the
Yeah.
point
Well, I have
where
hope, Dennis. I'm probably too much an optimist, but at least it would start.
it would give a base level that would be good.
Yeah.
And you know, there's in meteorology, there's two. Okay, there's the AMS, where they're big on getting the seal for television meteorologists. That used to be quite the process. You used to have to explain your weather knowledge to a group of people. You had to be good at presenting it on TV. You had to you had to clear both of those bars, and you had to have a real education in meteorology to meet that level. It had to be an accredited university. Now they're giving AMS seals to guys that came out of the Mississippi State TV weather guide classes
Yeah.
with no math needed.
Yeah.
They gave a big award to a guy that made a big contribution to the group. And in the other group is the National Weather Association, the NWA, which was more for operational forecasters than TV people. NWA has not been corrupted. Articles in their journal still ask the questions why. They don't have, like the AMS journal, this is how it works. This is how climate change works. And if you don't believe it, you're shunned. You're not AMS material. They can be corrupted, but they're still better than not having one at all. The other is that there are some people that it's like that the old Supreme Court justice, I forget who it was, when he was ruling on something, and he says, when he was asked to define it, he says, well, you know it when you see it. When it comes to fantasy football experts, you know it when you see it. Okay. Here we are on Wednesday evening. We're recording this on the 13th. This is Bob Harris's birthday. Bob Harris is an expert. Bob Harris knows his stuff. I've talked with the man. I've watched, read his articles, watched his videos, listened to him on the radio and on podcasts. This guy is not bullshitting anyone. He knows his stuff. Our buddy Greg Kellogg, another Hall of Famer in the fantasy football world, he knows his stuff. Like, you can't fool those people. You can fool some people, but you can't fool the people that know their stuff. And it's curious that those people, the Jim Coventrys of the world, people who are really good at this, when we talked data with them at the expo, they got it, Professor.
Yep.
Some of the other folks who proclaim to be great experts, they didn't really get it. And that's the difference. Because if you're really good at a field, any field, you're always curious to talk to others about the data behind the science of what you're studying. And You know it immediately when you talk to these people if they get it or not. They may not understand your rationale. They may even disagree with your rationale. That's perfectly fine. But they're curious enough to ask questions about how you were approaching the data. That's a sign that they're pretty good at what they're doing when you can intrigue them with data. Uh, Fantasy Bosco, another guy that really knows his stuff. And he was curious enough to ask a lot of questions when you talk to him about data. But you're right, Professor, until we get to that point where we have a society. Now, I've seen it happen in other businesses and other industries. In the auto racing world, with NASCAR got so big, right?
Yes.
And one of the problems is they had a lot of engineers to choose from, but they didn't have engineers that were specialty in auto racing. Clemson University, among one of the colleges that started up a great program for engineering students who wanted to learn more about the engineering of automobiles, whether it was to work for GM or a major manufacturer in the auto making business or in the auto racing business. Their program crosses over to both, and it's fascinating that it's very specialized. They might only have 6 to 12 students in a given class. It's very specialized, but they're turning out students that have the wealth of knowledge to go between manufacturer or the auto racing world equally well. And that's what we need in the fantasy football world is we need the data scientist part, but we also need people that are kind of coached to be able to present that data well. So you being a teacher, you've spent years of understanding how to take complicated stuff, biology, and to not dumb it down for your students, but to present it in a way that they could understand it. And in fantasy football, we sometimes have people that just talk at other people or they talk down to other people and they're great at making noise, but they're not really good at communicating. And you and I are attempting to not just hand people the fish, but show them how to do the fishing themselves. Show you how to be better at fantasy football, because I'm of the belief that anybody who's intelligent enough to play fantasy football can understand the data enough to get better at understanding the data. So, but I've seen similar things happen in other industries and it works great. And we do need that in fantasy football.
I am looking forward to the day we will have that. I don't know when, but hoping it's sooner than later. Sure am. We probably should start the show, Dennis.
I think that's a great idea, Professor. I'll fire things up on this end. I love it when you get philosophical, though.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, get the real show going.
How you doing, everybody? This is Dennis Michelson. Welcome to the science of fantasy football. Why the science of fantasy football? Well, you get a meteorologist and a biologist together. They're going to use a scientific method that is guaranteed to make you a smarter fantasy football player. How can I give a guarantee in fantasy football when we can't even have a guarantee of who's going to be the Colts starting quarterback from one week to the next? Well, it's because using the scientific method just means you're going to use data in a smarter way, and data is what drives or should drive your fantasy football decisions. And joining me as he does each and every week, and as a matter of fact, twice a week during the regular season, He is the professor after all, a real professor. It's John Bush. And John, boy, oh boy, this time of the year, you kind of know whether your fantasy football team is a contender or a pretender. And I'm glad to say I only got a couple of pretenders in my roster.
Well, Dennis, I have not. I mean, I know that every week I see a number by my team's name, but I'm not paying attention to that. I'm not giving up. I'm proceeding like I need to proceed and will continue until I can't anymore. And the data that I get from my moves, I'm learning, teaching, setting down new patterns, thinking about new ways of doing things, and just grading myself after the season. So if I started dividing now, you know, people shouldn't do that. Play to the whistle. And now's the time to really hit your diary hard. Start looking back. Look at your draft board. Go back. I bet you'll see that maybe in some of your pretenders you had CMC, you had Godwin, right? You have CD Lamb, who we're concerned about. You
Oof.
may have had Pittman. Metcalf's been on and off her. I mean, think of some of the players, Brian Thompson, without without Lawrence now. Where's he going? I mean, there's escalators going up and down in value, and the next few weeks are going to be really interesting. We got two Mageddon weeks. What, six teams on by or four?
Oh, yeah. Six
Week
coming up.
14,
Yep. Week
Henry
14.
is out. We've been riding
Oh,
his
yeah.
coattail. Yeah. And I think Stevenson is out, and he has really helped me on the weeks like this week. I think Connor's out. Is that right? Is Arizona out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Arizona's
I
out.
found when I was setting my next week's lineup initially, I was doing that Sunday night and Monday night while the games were on. I set my defense up for the next week while waivers, and I start going ahead and kind of seeing the landscape. I noticed right away, Dennis, I have a lot of Connor shares, and I was replacing with Stevenson. So I just hope he has a median week to get me by, to eke on by this week. And but boy, having him and Henry out, whew, but I'll have Connor back, so I'm hoping it will all balance out. That's the good thing. But sometimes it's hard to visualize week one versus 14. You have this
Oh,
theoretical, like, yeah, I know it's coming, but until it's actually here, until it's like, the old fish slap, right? You got the fish, but if somebody takes it and uh, hits you across the face, well, okay, yeah, that's a big fish. Uh, Monty Python did a skit called the fish slap dance,
yep.
and it made no sense at all. They were like, they were hitting each other with fish, and it's just like that doesn't sound funny, but Dennis is laughing because they had a little dance, it's like they're doing a jig and hitting each other with the fish slap dance. And I mean, this was back, 1970. I mean, nowadays it sounds like something you could probably see on TV, but back then, I mean, our TV only had three channels and something. When we watch PBS, Dennis, and see this British stuff, and they were, eating spam, and Vikings coming down eating spam and fish slaps, and
The
you know,
lumberjack song.
lumberjack, and the Ministry of Silly Walks, and all these little skits they did. It's like, what is this? And it just woke me up there as a kid. It's like, I've never seen anything like this. This is not like our TV. So anyway,
No,
that I think
they
it's hard to realize until you've been slapped by the fish what week 14 and I think week 12 is going to do for our teams. We're going to be scrambling those weeks. So, folks, it's coming. Get ready for it now.
Yeah, the combination of growing up watching Monty Python and Second City TV out of Toronto,
Oh, man.
I think got me in the mood to be able to handle just about anything in life
Yeah.
because both both shows would come up with some of the most outrageous, crazy stuff, and I think that has prepared me well
Yeah.
in future life.
And probably
But
fantasy football, some of
and
our
in
teams and some
and
of the
in
decisions.
yes, and
Yeah.
in fantasy football. And here's the thing. Now, you mentioned some of the bad teams. First of all, I commend you for always playing every week
Oh, yeah.
without regard to where you think you're going to be, because in FPPC, and I love the format, by the way, of their
Yeah.
redraft where you play against points.
Yes. That's all we're playing for,
You
Dennis.
don't play matchups until the playoffs. And when you're playing for just points, you don't worry about what the opponent has in their
Nope.
lineup, but you just worry about putting the best point group out there.
Yeah.
Imagine, if you will, if you had, say, Burrow and Chase, and then one other really high scorer from last week, all on your team, and it was very possible to do in a draft. You have three guys that triple the median, exceed, more than triple the median in points. You can go from 12th in the standings up to 6th and be into the playoffs just like that. So you never give up. In fantasy football, you never give up. Always put a respectable lineup out there and play it to win every week. Now, I had a fantasy football home league, Professor, where you could win $5 every week for a win, and you could win another $5 for having the top score for the week. When you play like that, it changes your mentality to always be playing to win every week.
Yes.
Now, I do play some dynasty leagues where, if I get to this point in the season and I'm 1-9 and I'm 4 games out of the playoffs with 4 to play,
Yeah.
now it's the time to look and to see, okay, are there veterans on my team that I can trade for more draft picks and get my team younger next year? But I even see some people that, they're dealing with injuries because they were, it's possible you could have a dynasty team where, you lost CMC, you lost
Rashid Rice,
Rashid
Godwin.
Rice, Godwin. You get annihilated. I got a team where I won the championship last year, where at one point there's only 20, it's only a 20-man roster. So it's pretty small for dynasty. And there is no IR spots to hide people.
Yeah.
So you have to make the decision, is this somebody I'm going to cut? Or is this somebody I'm just going to wait and wait and wait? At one point of the season, Professor,
Yeah.
with 8 starters and 12 bench players, I had 9 guys on IR. So I went from first, last season, easily won the division to or win the whole championship, to this year where I'm struggling to hang around 5th or 6th place. But you just hang in until you get some guys back, and then you make your run at the end. But you never
Pacheco may be coming back.
Yeah, Pacheco's supposed to come back. That just complicates things for me because I got a couple of teams where I have Hunt and Pacheco. Do I play them? Do I play them both?
This week you play Hunt, but
you play Hunt, yeah. But those are the types of decisions that, you first of all, you never give up at fantasy football. You're always playing
But
to
Dennis,
win that week.
in your diary, okay, make note.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, and just say, look. But if you make note, this is where I'm at. This is, you know, look at the draft board. This is what happened. Kind of start dissecting now a little earlier, and then say, okay, I'm going to do this and this, and just see, you know, if you're 9 games out or whatever, you know, you've only won 2 or 3, can you win the next 4? If so, what did you do? And make note of that. In other words, focus. Now's the time to focus on these next weeks for your success. In other words, put together 3 or 4 solid weeks where you win 2 out of 4. You know, if you've won 2 out of 9 and now you can do 2 out of 4, that's an improvement. Are you, you know, probably not trading, but are your waiver wires? Has your lineups? Are you doing some new stuff? Are you taking some change? You know, kind of explore your decision making a little bit. And it may not work, but put it down, and then after the cool of the season is over and you have time to reflect, go back and look at your notes, but write down, you know, just my goal the next 4 weeks is to win 2 games. You know, just break it down like that. What do I need to do? You know, is there anything on the waiver wire that could happen? There's some players that could have a role. I think everybody's, you know, if you listen to the radio, Estime in Denver's the hot one this week. Uh, there's a few leagues where he was still out there, and I'm kicking myself because how did I let that slide? Sometimes with 40, I miss a few things like that. So I probably won't get him, but I've still put some bids in. Fortunately, I've hogged a lot of him because Dennis told me way back when, okay, especially my best ball. I think he's one of my top uh, plays. Him and Garando in San Francisco were my top plays for those you know, those deep rookie handcuffs. And so, you know, thanks for that. Woo woo, Dennis. Dennis has that skill set, and I really was. It's better than zero. Really helped me there. So I think my best ball. It's very possible if he takes off the next 3 or 4 weeks, Dennis, I might win a best ball or two that I wasn't expecting to win. You know, I'm kind of mid pack, and if he takes off and can get me, you know, 20 points out of the next 3 or 4 games, you know, per game, I've got a shot at, you know, making first or second.
And that's a good point. And my diary from the past has told me that I always close quite well. Okay, I have a better win-loss percentage during the bye weeks because of roster management. And I also finish strong each year because I have running backs to play.
Mm-hmm.
I have decisions to make at running back, whereas some weeks you're like, all right, I'm starting whoever is healthy. And that's and not on bye. Those are you don't have decisions to make. By the end of the season, I've got maybe 4 guys I got to decide between. Okay, which 2 are my starting running backs, and now do I put somebody in flex? You know, do I play all 4? Are they better than my wide receiver group? And that's a nice problem to have, but that's what the better than zero strategy does for you is it gives you better running backs at the end of the season than most teams do because it has a lot of the guys that are the big fab bids and you didn't have to pay a dime for them because you drafted that player and you kept him on your roster and you waited
Yep.
for the opportunity to arrive. So that's kind of the difference in strategy. And Professor, the question of the week. I don't have a gripe of the week. I got a question of the week.
Okay.
I got a question of the week this week, and I don't really even know the answer to it. Sometimes I have a question, and I kind of know where I feel on this.
Okay.
But my question nowadays, do we just have too much information?
The answer is, having done that lesson, our confidence goes up, accuracy doesn't. That's what a scientific experiment did in basketball bettors. They gave them 10 pieces of information and 50 and measured confidence and accuracy of predicting wins. And they got more confident about the same accuracy. So people get mad because they're like, I got all this data and I'm still, losing 7 out of 10 bets or whatever it is. They're mad versus, I've always hit 3 out of 10 bets. So, that's an overall trend. So you need to kind of track that. But that's why when we do our data, the stats and breaking it down, landscape views allow you to maybe find another piece or two of information that helps accuracy. I don't care about my confidence. I want to get better, and I think confidence will follow. In other words, the right confidence kind of after the fact. I have confidence that I'm going to win, and I've won at fantasy football because I've done it before and been doing it every year, making some years a lot, some years little. Some years I've probably lost a little bit, but in other words, my floor is pretty damn high, but my ceiling I know can be really great. So, I'm looking forward to the end of the season and seeing just how good I did this year. Last year was a good year. Wasn't a great year. 2015 was a great year
Oh yeah.
when I was
Yep.
my zero running back, walked right into the worst running back that we've seen. People don't remember that. Folks, it happened. I lived through that. And that's where the zero RB started, I think, that became popularized. And I'm sure this year, I don't know, maybe it will be a zero WR or something, since we had a lot of wide receivers have been hurt this year, Dennis.
Oh
Will
yeah.
people look back next year and tout that strategy? They're saying, oh, RBs are scoring a lot this year, as a group across because they hadn't had as much injuries. So does that mean everybody jumps on the hero RB zero WR trick? Whereas, previous years has been exact opposite. And that's where your zero RB, I think can fall down, or the zero WR, but you're better than zero, balances out. It's the best balance I've seen, and I'm sure there's people probably doing something like that, Dennis. We just hadn't paid attention.
Well, I do pay attention to what some of the other strategies are out there, and one that I really, it's funny when you read an article and you realize that you could have written that article because you believe in the approach so much. Mike Reedy
Mm-hmm.
he's got his adaptive style of draft, adaptive draft strategy,
Yep.
which is very similar to my zero RB, my better than zero RB. It's but the where it's lacking or where it's not quite as thorough is I basically say here's the roster management. You go more running backs than wide receivers. Huge number more. And it varies depending on how many bench spots you have and how the draft goes. But you just don't draft any ordinary wide receivers. You figure you pick up the ordinary guys on the waiver wire because we will be surprised by a couple wide receivers every year. There will be guys like Darnell Mooney who have relatively good seasons versus what they've done in the past. You'll have a Cedric Tillman who becomes a thing when opportunity arises. So those guys will pop up, and those are the guys you grab on waivers when they show a trend, or you jump ahead of the pack at those as well. But you just don't hang on to ordinary wide receivers. You just can't have enough running
So
backs.
Dennis, let me just modify that last statement. I use ordinary when I need
Yes.
nothing, and the DAPs and whatnot say there's an opportunity for a higher ceiling this week. Ray McLeod
Oh
last
yeah.
week, I
Yep.
was hopeful that Drake might not play. He did play. So I kind of went back, I was going to push a lot more. I backed off. But I was ready if Drake London, because he got a little hurt the time before. And I was saying, if he doesn't play or if he plays a little, then there's an opportunity. So sometimes these ordinary are just sitting in the weeds. For instance, uh, Lockett had, and with Metcalf out, I've played a lot more now that Metcalf's back. I'm probably scaling back and may not even play Lockett this week at all. But he's been got me 10 points last week or 11, which is won't kill me. Taking 10 or 11 doesn't kill you. It's the zero that gets you.
Oh yeah.
So that's how I use those pieces, like MVS in New Orleans.
Oh yeah.
You know, uh, I'm going to try for $1. He may got people probably jumping on him. That's fine. They can pay big money, but if people forget about him, I'll take him. There's some others, Mitchie, for $1. In other
Yeah.
words, I'll find 5 or 6 and I'll hit $1. One of them will come through most leagues. And, so I try to pick who might be a good play just this week. And so that's how I might modify that last bit. That's kind of advanced, kind of the churning at the bottom of the roster concept.
Yeah.
Or I use some of those to, like, hey, there's an RB potential opportunity. Like right now, I guess who's the guy coming off R in Green Bay? I forgot the guy's name because we were on him and then he
Oh,
went
at
to
running back, Marshawn Lloyd.
yes. So
Yeah.
now some of those ordinary WR spots, I've actually in a few of them, Dennis, I'm starting to bid $1 on him this week. Before everybody kind of wakes up because they're looking at, MVS and estimate, they're looking elsewhere right now. In other words, somebody like him is going to have to make a splash. And next week or two, all of a sudden, he's the big deal. Let's just say, and if Jacobs is hurt or something, I want to be there for that. So I'm starting to move with the dollar play a couple weeks in the time. And there's others like Thielen. I picked him up for $1 last week's. I've been stockpiling him, for $1. I mean, if he doesn't work out, I didn't spend any money on him.
Yeah, and that's where I totally agree with you. You churn the bottom of your roster,
Yes.
and I just won't draft those guys. I won't
No,
draft
no.
an ordinary wide receiver.
Uh-uh.
I will. I'll churn the bottom of my roster. If I've got an injury, then I add one. Okay, but when I start out the season, I'm usually taking like 4 wide receivers. That's it. And once I get done with all of the wide receivers that I've got projected to be 80 or more in MVP, and that's not a lot of them folks. So I end up having 4 really good wide receivers. After that, if I'm going to take a shot at a wide receiver, it's going to be a rookie or a young player. But I'll end up with, typical teams, 4 to 5 wide receivers tops, 8 to 9 running backs. And that's the ratio that the better than zero says to go with. But yeah, the too much information, it can get you off of making some smart decisions. And last week in our draft night out. Needed a wide receiver. Okay, I knew it was going to be a tough week with us because of buys and then because of injury. And we had to pick up somebody. And one was pretty easy. That was Xavier Leggett. I liked his opportunity. The other two I was considering were Joshua Palmer with the Chargers or MVS, because there wasn't a healthy body in New Orleans. Like there wasn't even a wide receiver on the roster over 5'10" that was healthy except for MVS. And that's why I kind of liked him. I went with Palmer instead of MVS, and it cost us a win. No, I wasn't expecting a 20-point game out of MVS. I was a 2-touchdown game anyway. I was expecting maybe 7-8 points. That's all I wanted. And I got the 7 or 8 points with the guys we picked up. So I was happy with the process. I just picked the wrong guy between the 3 that I really liked last week. But that happens, don't. And I did it, though, more on too much information. Chargers are passing more. Chargers are passing more. Now they've got some opportunities. And I was like, okay, if Ladd McConkey doesn't do it this week, who will? Well, the answer was Will Disley. I didn't have that one. Didn't have that one. And I needed a wide receiver anyway. I couldn't have used a flex. But that's going to happen. And we still came very close to winning. We are the only team with 1,500 points after 10 games in that entire league. So we're still at the top of the heap, 7-3. Very pleased with how the results have gone in that league, because we are drafting against some pretty good people and some very smart people in the fantasy football world. And, it's just we're doing better than they are because we understood the data more and we were sober for the draft, which certainly helps.
Yep.
But sometimes I do think you got to stay on process and not listen to the coach speak, not get caught up in the fact that we've got so much information. But I was curious to see what you thought about that as well. Well, Professor, Thursday night football, that means it's time to do a little handicapping.
I got a surprise.
But before let's get the professor's surprise in
okay
there.
So I just want to preview what we're going to talk about Saturday morning.
Ooh, I love it.
Real quick. So I'm going to throw some data at you. I haven't even expanded, so I'll just give you one block here. So what we're looking at is the PPR per scoring snap. And what I've got new, Dennis, is over here where I compare weeks 1 to 5, weeks 6 to 10, and got a difference. And so now we can go and look at the team and say what's improved, what's declined over the season. Where are teams moving up and down? And does that mean we should invest in deep, handcuffs and these kind of things? So I've got this data, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and sort it by position, do some box and whiskers, and we're going to look at who was leading the pack first 5 weeks versus 6 to 10, and who's leading in the differences. So I'm going to have a bunch of box and whiskers, and we're going to look at the team level for the scoring. Where's the scoring coming from in each team? What's improved recently? Look at Tennessee. Not too bad recently. So they're on the uptake, right? Look at Ertz down here in Washington. Not too bad compared to early. So it's the kind of thing to just kind of maybe the next 5 weeks, maybe there's some investment opportunities for deeper players or lineups, or just kind of seeing how things are going. I'll have the hard copy. People can use this as a reference. but I've been waiting to have enough data to really be useful for our run to the playoffs, Dennis. And I've got the usual snap data, but I've got
Perfect.
this data as well. So I did want to just jump in, and I've got some more stuff that I'm just building. I've got 41 slides right now, so I'll have more data, folks. I know you're saying, Professor, we pay all that money for your data and you're slacking off here, 41 pieces of data charts. Come on, Professor. Uh, I don't know, all I can say, Dennis, what are these people paying for? If they're not getting the raw data, and because I think people should have an opportunity not just to hear yes or no questions, but actually see things that we're doing, our process, what we're thinking about. Maybe people can find where we're missing something. Wouldn't that be great? As they say, Professor, you're slacking off. You're getting a little old, long in the tooth. That's fine. I'm ready for you to grab the rock out of my hand. Okay. And that's, if you watched a great show called Kung Fu, Hua Chang Kang grabbed the rock out of the hand when he was ready to leave the master. And I hope there'll be players that are watching and listening and learning, Dennis. They'll take the rock and they'll lead to the next level of the science of fantasy football. So I'm going to
And
just
that
stop
is
there.
and that's the big that is the big key, folks, is we don't have a desire to make you dependent
Uh.
for every answer.
No.
Okay. Now I love when our buddy John Paul, who we've interacted with a lot, and he listens every week to the podcast.
He's
When
probably about our only one that puts up with us. Thank you,
when
John.
when he asks a question of me, I know that he's not just looking for a simple answer. He wants to understand why I'm thinking this guy over that guy. And we love to encourage people to get smarter. We do not want people we are not in the game to create a socialistic society of fantasy football players that are dependent on Big Brother, us, to give you all the answers. What we would like is to get everybody smarter. And we understand there's a drawback to that because we get people smarter, Professor. We're going to have to play against some of these people.
Yeah, I hope
But I
not.
like the
That's why
challenge.
I have an
We like the
alias, so
we like the
I
challenge.
don't want people to know who I am. So I try to stay in the weeds. I want everybody to be asleep. See, Dennis, this is where I like, where you can actually see the data and look at it. So this is
So
fun for me.
so I love the idea of looking at who's getting better from the first five
Just
weeks to the
yeah,
second 5 weeks.
yeah.
Now I will warn people that you've got to look at where they are relative to others.
And I'm going to have that data. I'm going to
Yeah, I know
have
you
all the
will.
quarterbacks across the
Yeah.
league, running backs, tight ends. Why? But this is within the team, tells
So
you something.
yeah.
And then just the balance. So, for instance, Frisco is positive in two slots, quarterback and
Yes.
RB. Tampa Bay is slightly, their Otten's been doing okay, so positive in two. So you can find where they're moving forward and where they're not. Look at Tennessee. Pollard, he's sad. Henry's not there anymore, and you can kind of, they just hadn't been able to maintain that. They were strong early, and Pollard's kind of, there's a decline there, and that maybe that says Spears is worth grabbing on, that kind of thing. In other words, it causes me to have questions. Look at Washington RBs going down, that kind of thing. So it kind of warns me a little bit about things. That it's kind of like, you smell smokes, like, is there a fire? Yeah, could be. So that's the level I would take this, folks. is, for you to investigate deeper. And then if you have some of these players on your team, hey, should I cover my butt a little bit in Tennessee if I have Pollard? Yeah, I think so. I think this data is saying last 5 weeks have been a decline. So that would worry me. And remember, Spears has been gone, so that kind of thing. So I think you can get some pointers as to maybe some directions you could, and it might help you win an extra game or two in the next couple of weeks, which you need to get into the playoffs. And that's all we're trying to do, folks. Get you in the playoffs, and then we'll just let it roll.
Yeah, be very careful about using this data across teams, because I'll remind people that when it comes to increasing, for instance, if you started out so bad that you were a 1 and now in the next 5 games you're a 3,
It's going to
that's
look
a
good.
that's a huge increase.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at somebody who is a 10 and now he's an 11, he's still better.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and he's still better if he declines
A little bit. Yeah.
by 20%. But I love that this data gives you an idea of where to look within a team
That's what it's for.
opportunities. But it also will tell you, I mean, here's the thing. Tennessee's getting better, and we're starting to see some better games out of Ridley. If this is real, and Will Levis is actually better for a reason, if he's actually getting better at football, and I don't care where he still is relative to the better quarterbacks in the league, but if he is improving, and he is forecast to continue to improve,
he's improving on that
his
team.
wide receivers are going to be improving as well.
And you can see that's what you're seeing, a doublet there.
And when you see that, that's great news. And that will give you a clue to say, okay, maybe I can finally trust Calvin Ridley a little more.
Yeah, could be. Anyway, I'll have this for people to look at this, and we'll talk more detail, Dennis. We'll go through, and I'll have more data. And like I said, I have the traditional snaps that people can look at as well. I just haven't prepared it yet because I don't know. I don't know enough to format, so I have to copy and paste, and then I've got to tweak, and that takes me a little time. I need some computer people just to flip and make it automatically, and I don't know how to do that. So I'm a dummy, and I don't want to spend a couple of weeks to learn. So
or some interns.
Yeah, I need interns. Anyway, just wanted to showcase what we would. I'll have extra data to talk about Saturday.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I also get to be a guest on a podcast that you were on recently. I'm on with Tip and Greg and the gang over there.
Nice.
So
do we need to? So who are you having to pick your sleeper? You having to pick your?
Yes. So my sleeper, I cheated this week because he just can't be in the top 24, right?
Yeah. So who are you getting?
Well, who else would I get? Christian McCaffrey's a gimme using that strategy.
Dennis, find something tougher than that. Come on, man.
I will throw
Pull out the
another.
Fish.
I'll throw them
Give you
a
virtual fish slap for that. That is a virtual fish. Be tough.
But I did bench a guy in the top 12, James Cook, for Buffalo. They're going up against. That's bold, but they're going up against KC, and KC right now they're rushing defense has been awesome.
Yeah, the Daps are extra tough. They are. Dennis, they are whale slapping their opponents, especially on protecting field goals. Right?
Oh man!
Have you seen the videos of the fans watching that in real time and watching them melt down? I mean, Dennis, their old cold heart just melt down. Just could not believe the Chiefs did that.
Oh,
That was
those
pretty amusing. They, I guess they were recording their reaction,
they were
because I
getting
get,
ready to
yeah, to
celebrate.
celebrate, and we're going to
Yeah.
post the victory of, and so they were getting ready, and it turned completely, and they showed how the guy did that. They were, you know, I mean, it wasn't by chance. It was a deliberate move that it all worked like they wanted it to work.
They had three guys that could have blocked that kick. That's
Yeah,
how bad
yeah.
the Denver Broncos line protected because
Can you imagine Sean Payton afterward? Would
oh,
you
he
want?
had to be.
If
Oof.
I was a lineman, I'd be wanting to skip that locker room, go home in my work clothes, my uniform.
I,
I don't
I
want the coach to chew my ass.
no, you
Can
walk
you imagine?
from the stadium,
His
you walk.
head would explode.
Oh,
Man,
you
they got a chewing.
uniform and all, you walk out of the stadium, you walk to the
Just go, just
Greyhound
go,
bus
and
station,
catch a
and
ride, because you can't come back after that.
take the dog back to Denver because
Yeah.
you don't want to be on that
Yeah,
flight.
no, you'll take the dog back to Denver. That's true.
But
Ooh,
great to see.
yeah. Oh yeah,
An
as a Chiefs
incredible
fan,
block, man. As I was watching that in real time,
yeah,
I I will tell you. But see, now I don't tape my reactions to good things because I
yeah.
understand how that bad
Oh
juju can happen. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
worry about
As
that.
a Saints fan, been there, done that. And
But that was
still,
very
our Super Bowl part two was beating the Dirty Birds last week, so I was very amazed and pleased.
well, that kept you from having an equal losing streak. The
Yeah,
last time that they had lost eight in a row
yeah.
was when the bags were being worn
I
for
know.
the Aints. So
So we had something. We had
that was a
something.
that was
That's
huge
something to build on, we
with
think.
no wide receivers
Yep.
and with a defense that has been mangled and then traded away your best cornerback.
Yep.
That was an upset for the ages. That was showing what that showed is that the character of the team in a situation where they could have the coach just got fired. We got all the excuses in the world. We got everybody out. We could have just folded up the tent, played out the season, stay healthy, go home into the off season, cash our paychecks and not worry about it. They played their hearts out in that game, and that showed a lot of character, and it showed that they love that defensive or that special teams coach that took over as the interim coach. They love that guy to be so all in
Yeah.
for that game. I was very impressed with your Saints.
Yeah, it was good. Good stuff, man. Anyway, week
All right,
11's coming up.
you.
Here's my power rankings, and I guess we've got Philly and Washington Thursday night. Philly is 17, Washington -7. So it's
Ooh.
pretty, yeah, it's it's a little different there on those two as far as power rankings. The line is -3.5, 48.5. So it's husky, a light husky, lean husky. We like above 50, but 48's pretty good. And Vegas says Philly squeaks by Washington here. I think there's going to be a lot of good points. Now, with that said, Philly seems to be play them all except the defense and the kicker. With Washington, don't play anybody. I mean, look at the Philly defense, Dennis. They have really they have come on. If Philly plays Kansas City in the Super Bowl, oh my goodness. Whoever can get about 9 points could win. I mean, that would be crazy. That would be a hellacious Super Bowl as far as defense, if the defenses can continue. But that is I don't remember this other than against KC, some of the games. I don't remember it being this off between the two defenses, Washington versus Philadelphia. Like I said, looking at the efficiency, though, there's not really much different. They're both pretty high in the 70s, almost 80s. So that's pretty good. They both love to be at home. Philly's at home. Washington does not like away games, Dennis. 93% less efficient away. So Vegas knows that too. Philly doesn't like to rush away games. They pass a little more. Philly is nicely balanced, but little balanced to the rush. They can do that, and the pass a little below. So Philly seems more dynamic. Their defense looks extra tough, and Washington hates the away games. So those are things that warn me about playing a lot of Washington players. I wouldn't get too deep, folks. I know what Noah Brown did pretty good last week. I think McLaurin might be the only one you might want to play there. And if Brian can come back, Robinson can come back, you probably got to play him, but I don't know. I think he cuts Eckler's value too. So I'm really worried if I've got both those guys, which one to play. The dog's worried too.
Oh, I would be worried. I'm even looking in a few teams where I've been playing Jaden Daniels. I'm looking for alternatives because Philadelphia, they started the season and they were very vulnerable on defense. They gave up 29 and 22 points in weeks 1 and 2, respectively. Now they were 1-1 because their offense was good. But since the bye week, Professor, they've given up 16, 3, 17, 23, and 6.
Yep.
That's it. And you say, okay, they played the Cowboys, they played the Jaguars, they played the Giants, and they played the Browns. Okay. They also played the Bengals, who have been putting up
a lot of points,
hellacious points on everybody. They only gave up 17 to the Bengals, and they played at Cincinnati.
Yep.
I don't think this is going to
be close. And they don't
close.
like, Dennis, Philadelphia, 62% less efficient away.
No, that's why I say, that's why I pointed out that they're, this is a game where everything should be stacking up for Philadelphia because Washington's been the big guys this, on campus this year. I mean,
yep.
They've gone 7-3. They're, they're right there in the discussion for best team in the East.
Yep.
But they're not the best team in the East. Philly is the best team in the East. They're going to show it.
Yep.
They're going to win this game comfortably. I'm thinking.
So you take the spread.
I'll take the spread here. I'll give the 3.5. I think this is a 2-score game myself.
Wow.
So I think this is a 2-score game.
Is it the over though?
No, it's under. It's under. I expect them to hold Washington in the teens. I expect them to be, 9 points better. Okay. So I expect them to win by 9, but have Washington only in the teens. So we're talking, maybe a score here, maybe we're talking 26-17. That's it. So I'm looking at the under and I feel pretty good about the under, and I really love this spread. I think this is a case where Washington, because they've been surprising everybody by playing so good,
Yep.
Remember, they needed a Hail Mary to beat the Bears, and the Bears have been atrocious
Yep.
lately.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm looking at this game of not being, I look at it being a 9 or 10 point game.
Nice.
And
Nice.
so I look for Philly to do well. You're playing everybody on Philly. If Goddard's
Even
back,
Devona Smith, you
yeah,
got
oh
to play
yeah.
him.
Yeah, you got to play everybody here. So yeah, I like everybody on Philly. The kicker's been undependable lately, and Washington really hasn't been keeping you out of the end zone in the red zone lately. So that's why that's tough. So yeah, I like them all day, all night. Loving Philly on Thursday night. So spot the 3.5, go under on the 48.5, and I feel really confident about both of those picks. You know me, Professor.
That's
Sometimes I don't feel very
sounds
confident.
like I need a $2 parlay on that.
I'd take a shot at this and add in a Hurts anytime touchdown and
You
have yourself a nice three-legged parlay.
nice. Okay. Okay. I like that. That's good betting advice, Dennis. Good advice.
Hopefully it'll cash. And head on over to the Science of Fantasy. You notice I say hope because I can be
Hope.
as confident as I want.
Yeah.
But as soon as you put the money down, you realize that, there's a reason that you don't win every horse race either.
That's right.
Head on over to scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Check out all of the professor's data. It will be there before you
Somewhere,
need it.
sometime, it's
That's for
coming.
sure. Check out my articles.
They're all three are up, Dennis. The
Yep,
third one went out today.
broke down the consensus
Love the
figures
tiers,
by
love
tiers.
the
Yeah.
change, love all that. It's really, to me, it frames my thinking going into the lineup Saturday. I'm still working on waiver wires tonight on my 40 teams here. So I'm wavering. But after that, I'm going to go back and review your stuff and then have that as I go and set the lineups.
And it's been really interesting to me because when you break it down with my four different metrics, right now, Justin Jefferson has the equivalent of a tier and a half between him and second place. And then there's another tier down to third place. So he's got very close to a three-tier advantage over the third place wide receiver right now. That
That's
is phenomenal.
crazy.
And if you consider that CeeDee Lamb's probably going to be dropping because he's WR3 right now, he
Yeah.
will have more than a three-tier difference between him
And
and
that is
third
too bad
place.
because we really needed some CD Lamb in
Oh,
our dynasty.
could be hurting us a little bit
Yeah. Okay.
down the stretch, and that's how injuries can factor in when you don't want to see it. So head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Check out the data, check out the articles. Hey, if you have any questions, find me at Twitter at DMikeMedia. You can find the professor over there as well. And head on back here Saturday morning for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks. That was good, Dennis. I like
thought
that.
that was really good. I
We
love
don't
you
need, we
that
don't,
data, man.
yeah, we don't need the after the show too
No,
much
we had it
because,
before the show.
yeah, we
Yeah.
did a lot before the show, but
Yeah.
I did want to follow up on team structure.
I love that.
And
I absolutely love that.
yeah, so it just sets to, I'm glad I've got enough time to do a little bit, you
Yeah.
know, to keep up. But anyway, I'm going to be interested to see the changes, the scoring changes. Just I'm curious to see, what you're going to make of some of that. And, and it'll be up there for everybody to look at. So, but once I have that, and I'll come in with the box and whisker. I've already got it. I just hadn't made the figures yet, and I hadn't done the box and whisker on the, within positions on I was going to do the box and whisker, the early, the first five, the next five, and then the difference, and just kind of compare those big trends, and then we'll look at team specific who's been leading in both segments. It's kind of a consistency thing. I can mark that as well, and we'll
Yeah,
figure
and
that out.
what I did today is I charted for future reference on my by the numbers articles. I
Yes.
charted how many hit the categories from 10 points up
Yeah.
at every position.
That's
And
nice.
what I'm going to do next is set up the calculations to show me by team, so it kind of equates out the bye weeks from the
Right.
other data. But it's fascinating because it also is it's telling me what I really needed to know, which I didn't. When you start doing charting of data for one reason,
Yep.
it's
Sometimes you'll
interesting.
find something else. Yeah.
It's interesting how it'll show you the pattern. I've always wondered, have I set the numbers right for MVP?
Yeah.
And my basic attitude about that is it really doesn't matter, because you're comparing player versus player using the same dynamic.
Right.
If you adjust the levels, all it's going to do is affect what the MVP score is. It's not going to, affect, okay, instead of, if I change the dynamic, instead of my top 12 all having like 890 or higher on MVP, they'd have 100 and higher. So I don't really worry about that. But when I looked at it, the number of running backs above is basically a little less than one per team.
Yeah.
Which is perfect.
Yep.
And wide receiver, it is basically 1.5 per team.
Yeah. So there's
on
some
average.
teams with two.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's telling me that I think I've set the bar
About right.
at the right level. And then, for instance, at running back, so there's, roughly one per team that hit that 10 mark, but 20 or more is about half of that.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, not even half. It's about 1/4. So setting that bar at 20 or higher to get more credit in both best index and MVP was a good number to set. Like it takes, okay, this is a population of 32,
Right.
and now it's a population of 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, if you're going to give extra credit,
Yeah.
and in some weeks there's only 2 or 3. So it's very interesting setting that bar. And then it told me what I needed at tight end as well, which is it's harder to get those levels. But that's okay, because I want to have a comparison for flex starters.
Yes.
And this tells you, unless it's 2 elite tight ends, that you don't want them. You don't want a second tight end in your
But
flex.
fortunately, I was able to grab Kelsey and Hawkinson.
Oh, yeah.
I played them both last week, and I actually have a couple of Jonnu Smith, and I actually played 3
Oh, yeah.
tight
Yeah.
ends.
And in tight end premium, that makes even more sense.
Yeah.
Because that will catch them up. Yeah.
Yeah. That just, I collect and collect versus, like a Ray-Ban McLeod or somebody that's a marginal flex play.
Yeah.
I can get the same bang for the buck with a good pass catching tight end, a lot of activity.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. And that's been really good.
But doing this mini study today, it told me, man, I'm on the right numbers.
Your distribution sounds like you would expect it to be.
Yeah, and
it's not wacky.
Yeah, and I knew that 10 was too low, but 15 was too high.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So setting it at 10 just makes data collection easy.
Yes.
Okay. It's a
Yeah.
lot easier to not miss somebody. Okay, 10 or higher, good. You get a
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But doing it that way, it's fine because it's where you give that extra point and where you take away points. And, you know, when you've got a population of guys scoring under 5 that would
Right.
have been in starting lineups, that population is pretty close to the population of the extreme of the 20-point plus games. So you're taking away a point for something that's as obscure as that 20 or more point game. It's a significant number. And that made me very happy because I'm like, okay, there's a reason that this is working. It's not a fluke. There's a reason that this data is good. And but doing all of these in season studies is very interesting. I did it not so much for the study aspect, but so I could have data to comment on in future articles.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that seems like it's higher than usual this week. But is it? Is it just my am I remembering this wrong? But now having the data, I can actually cite, you know, only 4 weeks, you know, you only had 4 weeks all season where X number of players were above 20 points.
Yeah.
That to me is just makes for understanding how significant that is more. But fascinating stuff. But it's just my first wave of these in season studies that, again, like your data, if they show you something, if they show you absolutely nothing, if there's nothing interesting in there, why do another 5 years of data on it?
No, no.
But if it shows you something interesting, now you need to go back and look at the previous years. Just like this off season, when I'm done with my numbers for this year and calculating the new numbers based on the last 2 seasons, I'm going back and doing what I call retro studies. I'm looking to see, you know, I've got everything through 2018. I want to see what they did in 2010. You
Yeah.
know, I'll go back as far as I need to, because once the data is put together, it's, you know, it gives you more power.
Oh,
And then
definitely.
going forward, you're obviously going to keep all that data for evermore. But it'll be interesting to see once it gets elongated out another, say, 5 or 6 years. Now I've got, you know, 12 or 13 years of data instead of 6. What is it? Is there trends? Do we see cycles? Do we see players coming in and out of the league? You know, that's what I want to see. But man, this is fun stuff to dive into this shit.
It
It's
is. I
it's
love it.
been my morning routine
Yeah,
lately.
I like it.
So,
Well, you got the data dog and the data cat to help you.
oh God, we had a little scare this afternoon.
Uh-oh. Did
We had
all
a
get loose?
well, no, the cat was missing.
Uh-oh.
So we had a guy in working on the furnace because our
Uh-huh.
thermostat's not working right. And so I have to manually go downstairs and turn the heat on and off, you know.
Oh, that's no fun.
Oh, it's terrible. But
I think I'll
but
stop
he
recording,
yeah,
folks.
that's a good
Y'all
idea.
take it. We gonna hear cat and dog stories.
So
Okay. See you
yeah,
next
so
time.